So where we left off last week was we had finished chapter 6. This week, we're going to be starting chapter 7 on page 89. And to bring into scope where we're at in the book for anybody who's new joining us, we've mentioned this before, that you go through that step 1 through 9. It's a one-time deal, right? By the time you're midway through step 9, you should have recovered by that point. We've read that. May have happened sooner than that, but certainly by midway through step 9. And then as we get into starting step 9 of making our amends is right. This is when we start, 1 through 9 is worked in order, it's a series of action. But 10, 11, and 12 are not so much. 10, 11, and 12 is really you've heard AA it's a way of living. I think we read that in the beginning, that we have a way of living that has its advantages for all. The AA way of living is not steps 1 through 9, it's what happens afterwards. Once you become recovered, we're doing step 10, 11, and 12. And we do them conjunctively every single day. They're not done in an order. And you do them as soon as you start doing step 9. So if you're working with somebody new, in context, the way they've spelled this out in the book, that's how this is done. And we've already went through the last couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, we went through steps 10 and 11. And we figured out in there, the idea is to start, in step 3, it was making a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God. Our will is our thoughts, our lives is our actions. We're turning our thoughts and our actions to the will of God, because I can't manage my own life. We learned that in step 1. Our lives are unmanageable. We're going to need God to help us to manage it. The whole idea here is not God's going to keep me sober. Okay, that may be the case if that's God's will. Hopefully it is, but it's whatever his will is. That's the idea here. We're not turning to God to just keep me sober. It's to manage my life, right? That's the whole idea. So, and I also remember that there was a statement made about step 3 saying that God is going to provide everything we need. If we make this decision to turn our will over to him, and we're going to start living the way that he wants us to live, then the deal is he's going to provide everything that we need. What our part in that is, we have to keep close to him and perform his work well. So the keeping close to him, well, the idea is he's going to be the director, is what it says. He's the father, he's the director. He's going to give me directions on how to live my life. That means I'm going to have to find out what those directions are. And step 10 outlined exactly what we're to be doing every day to ask God. How are we going to know what he wants us to do if we're not asking? So we're going to ask him what he wants us to do. And in the process, then we also will shut up and listen. That's also called meditation. That's the Detroit terminology, is shut up and listen. That means meditation, same thing. And it just means that we're going to listen to get the direction from God. So now we've asked, now we know what he wants us to do. And now it's up to us if we're going to do it, because we have to perform his work well, right? And we know the forefront of that performing his work well starts coming in with step 12. That's carrying this message to other alcoholics. Just as a little recap, if you go back to the doctor's opinion, we're going to go way back towards the beginning of the book. I believe it's on page XXV, the very first page of the doctor's opinion. It says here, if you go up 3 paragraphs from the bottom, this is talking about Bill Wilson when he first recovered. And the doctor says it was in the course of his 3rd treatment at that hospital that he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. That's really step 1 for Bill. They didn't have 12 steps. Step 1 was he acquired these ideas about a possible means of recovery that we know he got from Ebby, his friend who had recovered. So he got the ideas. Later in the chapter, it says that once he got those ideas, he put them into practice immediately, and he recovered almost immediately. It didn't take him to step 9. It happened pretty quickly for Bill. So the first part of his recovery was what? Becoming recovered. That's not the end. That's only part 1. Says as part of his rehabilitation, that means there's more than part 1, he commenced to present his conception to other alcoholics. That's part 2. Bill got well. Then what did he have to do? What did he have to do? He had to present his conceptions to other alcoholics. How I got well. That's the discovery. That's what he discovered, how I got well. He's going to present that to others. In the third part of his recovery, it says, impressing upon them, the guys that he worked with who recovered, that they must do likewise with still others. Does that not sound like 2 parts out of 3 have nothing to do with me and my recovery? 2 parts out of 3 has to do with me working with other people and pushing them on to work with other people. How important? 2 out of 3 is 66% of the recovery program has to do with what? Working with other people. And that's why, undoubtedly, when we get to chapter 7, we've got chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We got 5 chapters left in the first portion of this book. So what is that? I don't know, close to 40% of the book still left to go, and 38%, something like that. I think we figured out that all those chapters are about step 12, working with others. It's 2/3 of the program. And I'll go back again to the doctor's opinion, just to finish that statement that he had made there. As part 3, he insisted that they do likewise with still others. And then the doctor says, this has become the basis. You remember what a basis is? A fixed pattern of doing things. This is AA's fixed pattern of doing things. It's become the basis of this rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. The fellowship of AA, the basis, the fixed pattern, not subject to change, is that we get well, we help others, and we insist that they do likewise with others. They spelled that out right in the beginning of this book. That doesn't change. That's what we have to do. In the second piece of that, or the 2/3 of it, the working with others, that's not an optional piece. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean, here's the question. Number one, if I'm not working with other people, does it mean I'm going to drink? Not necessarily so. And we will pick up tidbits of that as we go along in this. But I can also say from what I've learned from this and from my own experience, not necessarily so. I stayed sober, just going to meetings and not working with other people for about 13 years. Now, as many of you know, I about killed myself in the process. I had an attempted suicide at the end of that because I was so freaking miserable. See, we'll regress from our recovered state and the promises and all this great stuff we feel. It feels great once you become recovered, but we don't stay that way. We have to continue to do this to stay that way. We have to continue to perform his work well, or he's not providing what we need. If he doesn't provide what I need, I'm cut off from God. If I'm cut off from God, who's directing my life? Back to me. How's that worked out so far? Probably not so well, or we wouldn't be sitting here right now learning about this, right? So we have to do that. It's just part of the deal. So I just wanted to kind of preempt where we're at here in what we're getting into. So on that note, let's look and see what they got to say on page 89 about working with others. First sentence, a lot on this first page here. First sentence says, the first statement they went, 5 chapters, remember, almost 40% of this book is going to be about working with others. The first statement they made, practical experience. So whose experience is that when they say practical experience? The authors, more than 100 people, this is their experience. Practical experience shows that nothing that you can do will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. I often refer to this sentence when we're talking about working. If you want to ensure immunity from drinking, it says that there is nothing that you can do, nothing that's going to ensure that more than intensive. Don't overlook the word intensive. It doesn't say working with others, it says intensive work. Intensive is defined as highly concentrated, which means, as we'll find, it can be inconvenient at times, working with other people. Your phone could ring at any given time. You may get involved with all sorts of crazy things that happen with us, right? We're working with other people. It's not a convenient thing, but that's what we have to do. And I think some people have got off track because it says nothing about it in here. But a lot of people I've heard say, and again, in the past, before I studied this, I spewed the same nonsense, is that, well, step 12, that's carrying the message. Well, the way I do that is, you know, I make coffee at the meetings, you know, the service work. We're talking about, they're not talking about service work. There's nothing in here about service work at all. Not that service work is bad. You know, it's part of what keeps us together. And I want to say, I was thinking about this actually this morning. I want to say thank you, especially to Tom and to Wynn for, you know, religiously being here every Saturday that they're available in the morning and getting this room or the room that we're in all set up, get everything in here so that we can enjoy the meeting that we have. It doesn't just happen by itself. And also stick around. They're the last ones to leave as well to make sure everything's put away. I appreciate everybody else who helps, but these guys do that. And that is a very important piece of what needs to be done here, right? But I want to differentiate that from what they're talking about here. That is not step 12. Step 12 is simply carrying the message. What is the message? The message is how we recovered. How we recovered. And that is what we find in here. So what does that mean? We teach what we found in here. That's it. That's all we do. Kind of what we're doing at this meeting today. So intensive work with other alcoholics, that's the deal. And it says it works when other activities fail. So let's think about that, because there's another point in here that is very interesting in Bill's story that talks about this. I don't exactly remember what page, but if you give me a minute. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, this is after Bill recovered. I think maybe page 15. Yeah, look at page 15. In the first full paragraph. Actually, why don't we go to the last sentence on page 14? We'll start there because that ties into this too. It says, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, sounds like step 12, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots which lie ahead. Okay, it says there certainly will be low spots that lie ahead, even after you recover. And we're not going to survive them. And it could be that we blow our brains out. It could be that we'll read in some of the later stories where a guy hung himself, guy jumped out of a window. These things happen, or we just drink ourselves to death. That's what they mean by we will not survive these low spots that lie ahead. And if he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. And with us, it's just like that. So on that note, look what Bill has to say. This is right after he recovered. And we read on the last page, he talked about what it was like for him to recover. He said it was like the great winds blew. I mean, he had some spiritual experience. It was not in a spiritual awakening as they talk about, kind of slowly kind of happened, the slow transformation. This happened to him like at once. Like he was in contact with God at that very moment. It was a very a sudden thing that happened to him. So, and he was totally enlightened, right? Felt wonderful. This is what happens right after he gets out of the hospital, having recovered. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problems. Problems. He's not talking about the drink problem because he put an S on the end. Problems. Didn't we read somewhere that this solves all our problems? So he's helping other alcoholics to solve their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. Get this. We just talked about how great he felt. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. We've learned self-pity, resentment are all manifestations of self. So self is creeping back in. And this time, this nearly drove me back to drink. But I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. When all other measures fail, nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. He proved that then. And he says, many times I've gone to my old hospital in despair. He's feeling terrible. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted and set on my feet. Doesn't matter if the guy ended up recovering, taking this on or not. He went there and he presented his discovery. And what did he get out of it? He was amazingly lifted up and set on his feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going, a way of living. That's what we're talking about. So it says, this is back to page 89, it works when other activities fail. That was Bill's experience we just read. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. What do you mean by that? With other alcoholics, we can secure, as being a recovered alcoholic, we can secure their confidence when others fail. I think maybe page 18-ish, they talk about that. Page 18, second paragraph up from the bottom. It's all in italics. And here they say, but the ex-problem drinker, that would be us who have recovered. So we got an ex-problem drinker. Well, actually, an ex-problem drinker is just like this. It's somebody who's not drinking, right? He was a problem drinker. He's not now. Ex-problem drinker. But, because that could just be somebody who's sober, right? That could be an ex-problem drinker. At the moment, I'm sober. I'm not drunk. But it gives us two qualifications. The person who is an ex-problem drinker who has, one, found the solution, that means he's recovered, and who is properly armed with facts about himself, which he's learned through the process of this deal. If you have both those things going for you, it says you can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. And until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. That puts us in a unique situation to be able to help people in a matter of hours that other people fail. Psychologists, psychiatrists, spouses, whatever it may be. We've read about this. Nobody gets served, mostly because we don't tell the truth. But it seems when it comes down to it, we can work with another alcoholic in a way that nobody else can, if we're recovered, because obviously you cannot pass on something you do not have, right? So you can secure the confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill, illness. Life will take on new meaning. So this is what it's like to stay recovered, right? Life will take on new meaning, to watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, and to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. Several people in this room I know that and have experienced that. I have experienced that. No, undoubtedly. I mean, I moved here 3 years ago, and to start working with some new people here and there and see them recover and to see them start working with other people, I tell you, that is an experience you do not want to miss. And it's not an ego thing. It has nothing to do with me. The only thing it has to do with me is that I can see God is able to work through me where I am able to help other people. God works through us to help other people. And to see that happen, what it does is it reinforces what I'm reading here and what it tells me will happen. When I experience, now I know it happens. You know, that's what's important for us. To know the solution is to have experienced it. And when we experience it and we know it happens and we know that this happens, we are able to put out a very compelling message to another alcoholic, because we know exactly how they feel. We know exactly where they're at because we were there. We tried every remedy to recover just as they have and have found no answer. We actually have a solution that works. It really does. So it is something that you do not want to miss. Perhaps you're not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. Those are the ones we want to reach out to, right? Well, we're going to find that on the next page as preview of coming attractions. If we don't find any drinkers who want to recover, you can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, and hospital. This is where the book gets a little dated. We don't have to do that today. You know, back then, if they want to work with others, they had to do things very inconvenient. Today, all you got to do is show up on a Saturday morning or at any meeting, you know, and they're all within a couple hours. There's always a meeting around somewhere very close, right? All you got to do is show up there and in the beginning say, do we have any newcomers? And if somebody raises their hand, you got somebody that you can talk to after the meeting. You got a potential candidate to work with. That they didn't have that then. You want to work with somebody? If you're convinced this is what you got to do, you got to go to a hospital. You're gonna have to pull up in a parking lot. You're gonna have to walk your way around. You're gonna have to find out who's the doctor that works on some kind of ward that deals with alcoholics and try to convince him what you've done and that you can help others and if he will let you talk to them. That's a pretty tall order, isn't it? These people went out of their way to make sure they work. We have it so much easier today than they had it then. There is no excuse to not work with another alcoholic today compared to what they had to deal with. They will be only too glad to assist you. Don't start out as an evangelist. We're getting some clear-cut directions. Do not start out as an evangelist or reformer. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You will be handicapped if you arouse it. We've heard that word before. You'll be handicapped if you arouse their prejudice. Ministers and doctors are competent and you can learn much from them if you wish, but it happens that, and I would underline this, because of your own drinking experience, You can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. So cooperate, never criticize. To be helpful is our only aim. That is our only goal, is to be helpful wherever we can be. So now page 90, we're going to get into it. It's working with other people. Mentoring. I guess that's the other thing I want to mention is mentoring. And that is because we use the term in AA a lot, the sponsor. And sponsor, the word is not in this book, right? And you know, mentor is not in this book either. The best they use is on this next page. They talk about a prospect, right? But if you start looking at the definitions like we do in the dictionary, the definition for a sponsor is somebody who takes responsibility for another person. And we all know we do not take responsibility for somebody we work with. I am not responsible whether you decide to take this on, whether you do the work, whether you recover or not. That's not up to me. That's between you and God. I'm just going to show you what to do, right? We're not. So that term does not quite seem to apply as much as what are we doing? We're teaching what we learned of how to recover. If you're teaching, that's the same as mentoring, isn't it? Teaching.
Yep.
That's the term that I prefer to use anyways. So anyway, it says when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, first thing you do, you want to start writing down directions? Here it is. First thing you do when you got this prospect, find out all you can about them. You got somebody new at a meeting, you raise his hand, her hand, whatever. Go up to him after the meeting. Sit down and just start trying to talk to him. You know, first meeting, what have you learned? Just find out everything you can about him, their work, whatever. If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. So it sounds like what they're saying when you're trying to find out all you can about him, what's the one thing you're really going to try drilling down to find out? Does this person really want to stop drinking? Or are they here because a court sent them, you know, or are they here because, you know, their spouse has thrown them out but they don't really want to stop? That's what you want to find out. Do they really want to stop drinking? That's the question. And if they don't, what do? Don't waste your time trying to persuade them. And I've done this and I've seen others do this. Well, you know, like seen it happen with younger people. You know, you're only 25, you've got the rest of your life in front of you, stop drinking now, trying to convince them to stop drinking. That does not work. Did it work on us? No, it's not going to work for them. Do not try to persuade them. So why do we not try to persuade them? Not only does it not work, but what they point out here, it says you may spoil a later opportunity. That means if they think they have another way or still have it under control, just be friendly. Let them know that you're here. If they want to start taking hold of this, you know, come to the meetings, listen, figure it out. If you think you're an alcoholic and want help, I'm here, right? Spoil a later opportunity. You go evangelizing yourself to them and you're all over them and wanting to call them all the time or whatever. They go back out and they might not want to come back because nobody wants that. Don't spoil that opportunity. Just give them their space. This advice is given for his family also. That's an interesting point. Who's going to give the information to his family? Sounds like that's going to be part of our job. We're just starting to look into here. We're going to be working with their family. Didn't we also read in the doctor's opinion, this has become the basis of this rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. Even the families were doing this stuff too. They should be patient, realizing they're dealing with a sick person. Reading into that, sounds like it would be a pretty important thing if you're start working with somebody and you sit down and you start talking to their family. They need to realize they're dealing with a sick person. Might want to start going through the doctor's opinion, maybe a little bit out of the first 3 chapters of the book to explain the illness of alcoholism to them, so they understand that this is an illness and how this illness works. We'll see more on that. I'm just preempting it here. So now, once you've done that, next thing it says, if there's any indication that he wants to stop, next thing you do, he wants to stop. The next thing you do is have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. First thing we do, I talk to you. I got an idea about your background. I know you want to quit drinking. You want to start working. You want me to start working with you. Let's set up an appointment with your spouse or your loved one or whoever's closest to you. Might be a parent, whatever. See if they're interested in sitting down so that I can talk to them for about an hour. The first thing that we're supposed to be doing. Isn't that, anybody ever hear that before in AA? I'd never heard that before in AA, that we sit and start talking to family members and stuff and getting involved. And yet it's the first direction in here. It's probably because I never studied these directions in here. But this is what works, and this is what worked. So we're going to talk to the person most interested in them. And what are we going to find out? Get an idea of his behavior, his problems. So very, very pointed questions we're going to find out. What's his behavior like? We want to learn about his problems. We want to learn about his background. We want to learn about the seriousness of his condition. And we want to learn about his religious leanings. That might seem like an odd one, but I think by now, if you've joined us so far, you understand the only thing AA has to offer is a spiritual experience. And we know that we got a whole chapter to the agnostics, those who are agnostic, which they said more than half of their original fellowship was agnostic or atheist. And really, to get pointed, goes back to page 48 in that chapter that says, if you're a newcomer and you have a prejudice, right? That is what is going to handicap us, is a prejudice. So we want to find out if this person is somebody who's an agnostic, so we can go back to that. Even if we weren't when we came in, we need to study that stuff so we know how to deal with it. We know how to present this stuff right off the bat. It's, yes, it's to have a spiritual experience, but right off the bat, this is not religion. It's about getting your own conception of God. And if you're just open and willing to listen, we can move forward. But if not, there's not much we can do for you. We need to know that. So you need to know the religious leanings. And finding this information out from the person closest to him, more often than not, is going to be much more enlightening when you add that to the information you got from this person, right? When we get the information from the individual about his problems, his drinking and whatnot, seeing it from the other side, the family's perspective, can give us a much larger view of what's really going on. And it might be that they're lying. It might be that we're just so consumed in self, we don't even think about how we affect other people. But my God, when you sit down and talk to them, I can't tell you how many times I've had that happen with younger person, 25, 26 years old, you're working with them. And, it sounds like he's got a drinking, drug problem, whatever, but doesn't talk much about his family or any of those problems. Just, can't keep a job, whatever. And you talk to his family, you find out how much this guy's been to the hospital 3 times, got put on, ended up having to be revived once, and what that did to the family, the extended family, and just wrecked these people's lives. We are usually not so aware of that. And if we are, that we're not talking about it. So getting an idea of his drinking problem, the condition, you're going to get a lot more of that when you hear from the people closest to him and combine that with the information you get from him. Otherwise, you're not really going to know. And if we don't know, we're not going to know how to approach him. It's just going to prepare us better for approaching him. So you need this information to put yourself in his place to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. Sometimes it's wise to wait till he goes on a binge. The family may object to this. Do you think? Do you think if you tell him, look, he doesn't seem to want to stop drinking, let him go on another binge? They're like, this, he might die this time. What? Or let him go on a binge again? You're going to have to convince them why. Why? Because we can't get him to want to stop. The only thing that's going to convince somebody to want to stop is enough pain. And that's going to come from more drinking, unfortunately. The family may object to this, but unless he is in dangerous physical condition, it's better to risk it. Don't deal with him if he's very drunk. Clear-cut direction. I've had somebody call me before. This has happened one time that I had worked with. I hadn't heard from him for a few months. He calls me drunk. Can you come over to me with that? You know what? Why don't you get yourself together tomorrow? Why don't you call me tomorrow once this wears off, and then we'll talk. Okay. Don't deal with them when they're drunk. Why? Unless he's very ugly and the family needs your help, by the way. Wait for the end of the spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let his family or a friend ask if he wants to quit for good. It's the only question that they want to find out. Same one we want to find out. Are you ready to quit now? Come through what happens at the end of the spree in the cycle? We emerge remorseful. Are you remorseful enough that you want to quit for good now? That's what you want them to ask. And part 2 is, are you willing to go to any extreme to do so? Takes both those things. You want to quit, And are you willing to go to any lengths? There's many of us, you've heard the term probably before in conventional AA meetings where they say, he wants to want to quit. And that's somebody whose life is, and I had been in this position before too, where life was bad, but it just wasn't quite bad enough that I'd go to any lengths. Like, I'm really going to do this work. Maybe bad enough where I'll go to a couple of meetings a week and see if I can't just pull it together, but just not bad enough. But the question is, do you want to quit for good? And are you willing to do anything to get that to happen? If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. Past tense, not a person who is sober, but somebody who has recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as part of their own recovery, try to help others and who will be glad to talk to him if he cares to see you. Now, if he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. Neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. They should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. You might place this book where he can see it in the interval. Here, no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things, but urge them not to be over anxious, for this might spoil matters. If you really think about what we're reading on this page, we're starting to read about, you got this new prospect. You may have started working with them. You got to know the family members. And now this guy, he decides he doesn't want to do this. And he starts drinking. Sounds like you're still working and talking with the family members about how to deal with him now that he's still drinking, right? Very important information for them. We're working with family members even when we're not working with the individual. Usually the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family, which again, does not so much happen as often today, but approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. If your man needs hospitalization, he should have it, but not forcibly unless he is violent. Let the doctor, if he will, tell him he has something in the way of a solution. When your man is better, it might mean he came out of treatment, right? He's sober now, has a clear mind. The doctor might suggest a visit from you. Though you have talked with the family, leave them out of your first discussion, clear-cut direction. And I can't tell you, at least 75% of the time, when I go to work with a new person, I say, okay, so I'm going to meet with, your spouse or whatever it might be, and they set up an appointment, and I might spend an hour or two talking to them. And usually the first thing is the spouse gets drilled by him. What do you talk about? What do you tell him? You know what I mean? And then I hear about it, and then he comes, so how did it go? Leave them out of the discussion, it says. Leave them out of it. You do not discuss what you discussed with them. Under these conditions, your prospect will see he is under no pressure. He will feel he can deal with you without being nagged by his family. Call on him while he is still jittery. He may be more receptive when depressed. Of course, when we come out of that lucid interval, emerging remorseful, we really feel beat up, and that's when we're going to be most receptive to what is offered. See your man alone if possible. All right, so back to the discussion that we're going to have with him. At first, engage in general conversation. Doesn't have to be about drinking. After a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your own drinking habits. So I'm talking about me, and start talking about my drinking habits, my symptoms, and my experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. You're going to talk about clear-cut directions here, very clear-cut. If he wants to talk, let him do so. You'll thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he's not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit. This is very important. Give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time that you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. I'm not going to tell him about the solution. If he's in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades and get him to tell some of his. When he sees you know all about the drinking game, that's the whole deal here. Getting him to see that you understand the drinking game. Then you can commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were and how you finally learned you were sick. That is an important statement. How baffled you were. What does that mean, to tell him how baffled we were? It's like this. We've learned that if you're an alcoholic, when the two conditions that make us an alcoholic, when you honestly want to quit for good, you find you can't. Tell him how many times you tried quitting for good and found you couldn't, no matter how great the necessity and how baffling that was to you. I mean, I had the threat of losing my job, my wife, my kids, and I drank again. Could not understand it. Tell them how baffling that was. Or how when you try controlling the amount you take because you got in a lot of trouble and then you could not do it. I couldn't consistently just have 2 or 3. And baffling, I don't know why. Tell him how baffled you were and how you finally learned that you were sick. Let me tell you what I learned about why I couldn't do that. And then you can start turning about the doctor. This is why I didn't know that I was sick. I had this mental illness that stopped me from reflecting on a consequence. If they're an alcoholic, they're going to recognize this. They're going to, yeah, I tried stopping, I couldn't. And I didn't know why, but you're giving me an explanation that might make sense. This is very clear cut on how we go about this. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop and show him that mental twist that we learned about on page 24, which leads to that first drink that turns into a spree. Starts with the first one. We're talking about the mind and the body all together. We suggest you do this as we have done in the chapter on alcoholism, chapter 3. If he's an alcoholic, he will understand you at once, and he will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. Absolutely. If you tried quitting, found you couldn't, why? Why couldn't you? What was the excuse that you thought made it worthwhile? They'll have no idea. If you're satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, how are you going to be satisfied of that? We have to know what a real alcoholic is. Has this person tried quitting and found he couldn't? Has he tried controlling the amount that he took and could not do that consistently? That's how you're going to be satisfied. You're going to need to hear from him. If you're satisfied he's a real alcoholic, then the next thing we do is dwell on the hopeless feature of that malady. Now that he knows what makes an alcoholic, now that he knows why that condition exists, now we get into how that is a hopeless condition. Be it that you can talk beyond human aid. Talk about all the human solutions you tried on your own, from your own willpower to maybe going to AA meetings, doing this work, to maybe going to treatment centers, to maybe going to churches, how it is a hopeless condition. They need to understand that. No possibility of a solution. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition, again, page 44, surrounding that first drink, how it prevents normal functioning of the willpower. Don't at this stage refer to this book unless he's seen it and wishes to discuss it. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic, highlight, underline. Let him draw his own conclusions. None of us would want to be deemed an alcoholic by another person. Let him draw his own conclusions. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him that possibly he can if he's not too alcoholic. But insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of the mind and body which accompany it. Should have learned this by now. Remember what we just read, the ex-problem drinker who knows the solution and is properly armed with facts about himself? These are the facts. If you don't know about this illness, if you don't know about the conditions of the mind and body, if you don't know that well, then you are not properly armed with facts about yourself. Therefore, it's going to be very hard to be able to explain this to somebody else. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. No solution. But you may underline, talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism. And why can you talk about the hopelessness? Because you have a solution. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, of the traits of the alcoholic. If his own doctor is willing to tell him he's an alcoholic, so much the better. Even though your protege, there's another word they're using for sponsee, your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he's become very curious to know how you got well. let him ask you that question, if you will, highlight and underline that. Let him, well, how did you get, it's hopeless. How did you get over it? What happened? Did you just go to AA meetings? That's what I hear you do. You just go to AA meetings? Tell him, what does it say next? And this is all in italics. Tell him exactly what happened to you. And stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be an agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing underlined is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and that he live by spiritual principles, period. That's the solution. And that's what they want you to, they want you to underline. So I think we'll stop right there for the day.
Right where?
That is we're going to start on the first full paragraph on 93 next week.